3. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It's a joy to be with you today. I hope that you will meet my morning stars on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. Please like and subscribe, and click that bell so that you can hear when we are on the air. And I want you to do me a favor. Share this show on YouTube and share it on the Santita Jackson and Friends Facebook page. Please like and become my friend on Facebook on the Santita Jackson and Friends page. That's the only place where I can accept friends. But like and share the show. I mean, I've been getting a lot of feedback from you because you all have been sharing the show, and I'm so pleased to see that happen. We want to get a lot of great information out to people, and that is what we're able to do here on on the largest progressive talk radio station in this part of the country. Please, let us talk about what's happened with the students. We have seen these student protests accelerate in a really at a rate that I don't know if we've ever seen this before. Certainly something happened when the administration sought to close the encampments in Columbia, and then you saw encampments just pop up everywhere, and they're popping up everywhere, and these students are not backing down. Indeed, Bryce Green, Attorney Mark Fancher from the National Conference of Black Lawyers, brilliant civil libertarian, Attorney Daryl Jones, Chairman of the Transformative Justice Coalition. You and Barbara Arnwine are our foremost legal advocates for the vote in the country. And Jim Narakis from Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. I'm going to start with him. And I met Bryce Green, who's part of the family here. Indiana University student, graduate student, brilliant, as you've heard him talk about international affairs. Indeed, he was just at the UN just a few months ago. They wanted to speak with him about Ukraine because he has become so expert in that particular space. Well, he was protesting in support of Palestinian rights at Indiana University this past weekend. And guess what? He was banned from his campus for 5 years. 5 years, Bryce Green. He's on track for a PhD. These are the kind of penalties that our young people are facing, and we need to deal with that. And then the counter protesters. That is what happened at UCLA. And there is no evidence, no substantial evidence to bear out that the people who are really encamping against genocide, they have not been shouting racial epithets at Jewish students. They've not been tearing them down. But what has been happening is that they have been aggressively approaching these encampments and their demonstrations. And we got to talk about this. We've got to talk about the fact that the demonstrators have been pejoratively portrayed, but the counter protesters have not. And what's really going on here? So let me start with you, Jim Narakis, from Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. And at the bottom of the hour on this show, we're going to have Professor Angus Johnston from the City University of New York. I saw him on the Washington Journal this morning on C-SPAN. He's the founder of StudentActivism.net. He's going to help us to frame these demonstrations. But I want to hear how you think these demonstrators have been portrayed in corporate media. Jim Narakis.
I think this is one of the most upside down narratives in corporate media that I have seen in my 34 years of being a media critic. There is an absolute reversal of the roles being played by the protesters and the college administrations here. The college administrations are being portrayed as the forces of order, of protecting peace, nonviolence, of promoting debate, of safeguarding the academic process. And in fact, they have shown themselves to be, by and large, I think there are some honorable exceptions, but by and large, the college administrators have shown themselves to be opposed to debate, turning to violent repression of protest as the first resort. The disruption of the educational process on these campuses is directly a result of the efforts to silence protesters. Mm-hmm. The protesters are portrayed as violent, as hateful, as anti-Semitic. The fact that many of the protesters are Jewish students who are, in many cases, motivated by what they see as Jewish values, particularly the commitment to the idea of never again, that genocide is something that can't be tolerated. They are erased, sometimes attacked as somehow not being Jewish because they are opponents of genocide, which is just a grotesque perversion to tell Jewish students that they are in fact anti-Semitic because they are opposed to genocide it's something.
What about, I mean, because even the labeling of these persons as counter protesters is interesting because the demonstrators are portrayed as hateful. Indeed, what's interesting is, Jim Norikis and Mark Fancher and attorney Daryl Jones, attorney Mark Fancher, there was a march this past weekend at Northeastern University in Boston. And according to press reports, it was about 100 persons or so. And a young man waded into the demonstration carrying an Israeli flag, shouting, "Kill all the Jews." And of course that was disruptive, and he came there to be disruptive. They arrested the demonstrators, but not him. We
right.
don't hear that.
Citing the hate speech of the demonstration. There is I feel like the U.S. policy is so hard to defend on the merits that there needs to be a change of subject. There is no way to present the killing of tens of thousands of people, of 14,000 children, as somehow an ethical, defensible policy, and yet that is what the United States is heavily backing with its arms shipments to Israel, and that is what these protests are coming out against, and so you can't have that debate because one side obviously wins. The side that is against killing thousands of children is going to win that debate. So you don't have that debate. You have the debate about something else. You have the debate about Jewish students feeling unsafe on campus. And it's always described as Jewish students, even though, as I said, there are many Jewish students in the protests.
You're leading it in large measure.
Yeah. But when the media uses the phrase Jewish student, they mean pro-Israel students, and because that's obviously if you said that people who support the government of Israel are feeling uncomfortable, that obviously would have a very different resonance than if you said that Jewish students are feeling uncomfortable.
What do you think we should be looking out for as consumers of the news?
Well, I think that this is really a situation where you need to be looking for alternative sources of information, to look to the independent press, where you have an ability to hear what protesters are saying themselves, and not having it filtered through brief selective sound bites from corporate media, because this is we have gone into full-scale propaganda mode here, where the point is not to inform the public, or even given the impression that you're informing the public. The impression is to sell an indictment of these protesters as a clear and present danger that needs to be shut down, to justify the use of police force against nonviolent students. You need to make up a story about why that's okay, and that is what you'll get if you turn on CNN, let alone Fox News. You're not going to get a picture of what's going on, even a distorted picture. Because very often you can turn to corporate media, and if you have a certain amount of skepticism of how things are being spun, you can get information. You can understand what's going on if you kind of understand the language that's being used. Here, I think that you are just setting yourself up for being disinformed by reading or watching the coverage of the protests.
Let me pivot to you, Attorney Mark Fancher, and to you, Attorney Daryl Jones. I mean, Mark, what are you seeing?
I'm seeing things that by the day excite me to no end. I am really, I'm very serious. I am beyond ecstatic about what's happening because it is so contrary to the standard way of dealing with student protests. University administrations, police, for generations have been dealing with these kinds of demonstrations. They know exactly how to deal with them in a way that's non-controversial, non-confrontational, minimal arrest, if any, and especially for these, which are happening so close to the end of the academic year. The standard operating procedure is to just wait the kids out. Don't confront them. Let them go ahead and as they become involved in their final exams and graduation preparations and all of those things and summer jobs, all of this will go away. Just wait them out. But they have come at them with a vengeance. And what that tells me is that they have tapped into something so potent, so important, so vital, that they cannot afford to take the risk of these students being able to demonstrate, to be heard, even for a moment. They have to be shut down, absolutely, definitively, and without any question whatsoever. And this is what a regime does when they are absolutely in a state of panic, when they feel like they are, their backs are against the wall, and the revolution has come and they're about to be thrown out. This is how a regime reacts, which tells me, somewhat to my surprise, that may be what's happening. That never before has there been such global clarity about the contradictions of Zionism. Never before have people mobilized simultaneously and with such clarity of analysis and thought about what the problem is and who's causing the problem on a global basis than now. Never before have forces opposed to imperialism, Zionism, capitalism, never before have they been able to communicate as effectively as they can communicate now globally because of social media, the internet, and other things. And the effectiveness of that, the potential threat of that to the established order is overwhelming. Because even now you can see with the efforts that have been made on one campus to shut down the demonstrations, as soon as they shut them down, others happen elsewhere. They cannot stop this, and they know that they cannot stop this. it is a wildfire that is burning uncontrollably, and they don't know what to do except to fight fire with fire. And they're on their last legs. And this is coming faster than I thought it would come. And I don't know that this necessarily translates into revolution, because revolution contemplates a plan, an orderly process for changing the established order into something that's fundamentally different. But it does signal the potential demise of those who are in power, at least in ways in which they've become accustomed to wielding the power that they've had.
You know, Jim Narakis, I am going to welcome Professor Angus Johnston onto the platform in just a hot second, the founder of StudentActivism.net. He's a professor of history at the City University of New York. And you are free to stay as long as you like, but I know that fairness and accuracy in reporting absolutely needs you. I know I'm grabbing you in the middle of your day. I know that I am. And if you, begging your pardon, Attorney Daryl Jones, I wanted to bring Professor Johnston on to get, because I'd love for you to react to what he's saying, because he just imparted so much history when I saw him on a Washington Journal this morning. I couldn't even let you get through the interview. I had to put you on pause because I said, wait a minute. I've got to get someone who's going to talk about Kent State, but someone who remembers what happened at Jackson State, someone who knows that there were 4 massacres in a very short period of time. And I'm so glad that you had not forgotten that those HBCUs and Black people who were participating in the anti-war movement. What happened at Berkeley, what happened at South Carolina State, what happened in particularly at these Black schools, they were particularly cruel. A lot of people were killed. But what happened at Kent State was cruel. But there's historical context to that and all of this. But I certainly would like to give you a final word, Jim Narakis, but you know, my dear friend, you are more than welcome to stay. Because I think that we are being misinformed. And we're seeing these demonstrators. I've met so many of them. They are being peaceful. And the encampments have been loving. And they've been teach-ins, almost love-ins, and they have been Jewish, they have been Christian, they have been Muslim, they have been Black, they have been white, they have been LGBT+, they've been everything. And so just a word before you go, because we do need a media education. We need to know what we're looking at and how to interpret what we're looking at, because no one knows that, Wolf Blitzer's background. He's from APAC. I don't have a problem with that. Just disclose it. Tell me so I have a frame of reference for your point of view.
I think that the propaganda here, it's not hard to spot. When you see the protesters being characterized as CNN did today as being akin to Nazi Germany, you know that this is not based on reporting. It's based on I don't think it's too extreme to call it psychological operations. They're trying to pin a Nazi hat on people who are protesting genocide, and you should know that this is not an accurate depiction of what is actually going on campus. And if you want an accurate depiction, I think you should be looking at alternative media that are going and actually talking to people and reporting what they have to say.
Well, and I would urge people to go to fair.org so that you can read their analysis of what is going on. That's very, very important. I think that, you are fair. You really call balls and strikes, and I really appreciate that. And
thank you for having me on.
Oh, always. It's always a pleasure. And of course, Attorney Mark Fancher, National Conference of Black Lawyers, the chairman of the Transformative Justice Coalition, Attorney Daryl Jones. Let us welcome to this stage Professor Angus Johnston. We are so honored to have you today. And I must compliment you on the work that you do, the founder of StudentActivism.net. Go on, click, 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 Daryl, because I know that's what you're going to do right now.
I should interrupt you for a second
Yes.
and say that studentactivism.net is not going to be particularly exciting right now. I was on C-SPAN a few years ago and they pulled up my old bio. That's the blog that I used to keep, which I did a lot of really good work on for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
But it is, blogs are not what they once were. So
well, they have changed. But how can we keep up with the latest and greatest on you? Because I just started looking for everything I could find about you. Now I'm following you on X.
Yes, so I am Student Activism on Twitter, which I hate to call X. I am Angus.Biskey.social on Blue Sky. And I will be putting up at a minimum on studentactivism.net. I will be putting up a lot of the work that I've been doing recently, television stuff and newspaper stuff that I've been doing recently. So.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for responding to my beg so quickly. I appreciate that. Well, I don't mind doing that because I really wanted to get the information out. Attorney Daryl Jones and Attorney Mark Fancher, and please feel free to jump in, because one of the things that I do appreciate is, first of all, you started. Let's start with your reaction to Columbia University and CUNY last night. One of the regulars on our show, who we got from Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, is a graduate student at Indiana University, young, brilliant writer and analyst. Just gave a presentation at the full body of the UN. Bryce Green. Bryce Green was participating in a protest. He's been a lead organizer on Sunday, and he was banned from campus for 5 years. And then when I see what happened, well, let me not jump ahead of myself, because I certainly want to ask you about the counter protesters and how they're even called counter protesters. They're not called provocateurs. Let's just start with what was your reaction to this great show of force that we saw at Columbia and at CUNY last night and at UCLA?
Yes, I really do want to talk about UCLA, because I think in a lot of ways UCLA is the scariest of what we've seen in the last 24 hours. I think it is very easy to forget, when you look at the way that the media is covering this, that there are dozens of campuses right now that are seeing these kinds of protests and seeing these encampments where police are not being called in. Right? There is a narrative in the national media and a narrative on social media that this cycle of escalation is somehow inevitable, that it is happening everywhere. But the reality is that these student protests are, for the most part, peaceful. They are, for the most part, disciplined. They are, for the most part, engaging in really moderate tactics. And the escalation is coming overwhelmingly from the police and the administrators. And where that escalation is not happening, we are not seeing a lot of drama. We are not seeing a lot of trouble. And so what has happened at Columbia is clearly that, Columbia kicked this all off with their decision to bring in the cops nearly 2 weeks ago. And then they pulled back and decided that they were going to try to de-escalate and try to negotiate. And I think with commencement coming up, they wanted to take back the lawn. They wanted to be able to have the commencement exercises on campus in the way that they had anticipated having them. And so they made a decision that they would not just call the police again, but they announced that all of the students in the encampment were suspended, which is a recipe for escalation, right? It's one thing to say, okay, we're going to clear out the encampment and we're going to suspend everybody and we're going to lock everybody down. But to say, okay, you're still in place, you're still on campus, but you're now suspended. Well, what are the students going to do other than escalate in response to that? And so they create an environment where the students have their back against the wall. The students respond by taking over the building. And then Columbia responds by sending in the cops. same cops get sent to the encampment at City College that same evening. We are still sorting out exactly what happened because media access was very, very limited in both of those instances. And then at the same time, the same evening, what we see, as I say, is an even more chilling development at UCLA, which is that these folks hostile to the encampment at UCLA come onto campus and begin to engage with them very, very aggressively. They begin to attack the encampment. They begin to try and take down the defenses of the encampment. They start hurling in gas and fireworks indiscriminately into the encampment. And the UCLA administration responds by waiting 2 hours to call in the cops. And
say that one more time.
Yeah, they sit and watch. They sit and watch. UCLA campus security does not intervene, and they do not call in the police. Somebody asked me, a reporter asked me just now, well, wouldn't haven't the demonstrators been asking for the police not to be called in? But if there's one thing that any police department in a major city in the United States knows in 2024, it's how to separate two groups of protesters who are hostile to each other. Mm-hmm. That is not a complicated thing. That is not a difficult thing, right? You establish a cordon. You tell this group, you go in this place, you go in that place. You separate them out from each other. UCLA chose not to do that. They waited 2 hours. They allowed these counter-protesters, these provocateurs, to attack the encampment. When the police were finally called, the police stood aside for another hour and a half before coming in. And when the police do intervene, they were able to de-escalate it immediately, right? There was everything dissolved very, very quickly. And then this morning, what does UCLA say? They say, we condemn the violence that took place in the encampment. They create a narrative which says that the encampment itself was violent. And reading news coverage of this morning, when I woke up, the UCLA student newspaper, the Daily Bruin, got it exactly right. The LA Times, which was on site with their reporters, got it exactly right. Both of them described the situation exactly the way that I did. But what does the New York Times say? The New York Times says that there was violence in the encampment. Clashes between protesters and counter-protesters, condemning the administration condemns them.
Well, of course, and they have, New York Times included, they have portrayed the protesters as Hamas and Hamas sympathizers. And they have smeared them in the press, and they've created they've really made them enemies of state. These are children. But I don't think that, Professor Johnston, I don't think that people know that the police, that law enforcement officials stood by for 3.5 hours and let these people get attacked. No one called an ambulance if someone had been injured, let alone seriously injured. None of that happened.
And in fact, there were people in the encampment reporting that the college was not allowing medical help during that period.
Why did that strike you, Attorney Daryl Jones?
Yeah. At a minimum, the university, whether or not they agree with what the students are doing at the encampment, they have a responsibility to protect those students. And what we're seeing is the breach of that responsibility. And, there's no way that the LA Police Department, who's accustomed to dealing with situations like this, they know precisely what to do. And as Professor Johnston just laid out, when they decided to act, they were able to, to quiet it relatively quickly. So when I think of these students that are out there, one of the parallels that gets drawn is not the comparison of the student to Hamas, but the student to the non-Hamas Gaza resident. That they are there, they're in this place. They don't have a way to protect themselves. The university has the obligation, but they're foregoing their obligation, their responsibility to protect these students that paid to be at that university, that paid for the protection from the university, and the university is not giving it to them. It's a horrible situation for the students that are there. So when Professor Johnston talks about the student that needed medical attention and the university shrugged the shoulders, you chose to be out there. No, the university is supposed to be the adult in the room. You may not be making a decision that I agree with, but let me be certain I put in place things to protect you. That's what I think the obligation at a minimum is owed by the university. And that's why I believe that, as we watch this spread across the country to the various college campuses, that's going to be the position that the students are taking. That they are identifying with those that are being wronged in Gaza, and they're being paralleled right now. That's why they have the encampment. That's what the whole encampment is about. It's the parallelism. And the university is buying in to exactly the story that the students are trying to tell. The situation, and I'll stop on this, the situation that the students find themselves in is one I call, he who tells the story controls the narrative. And the question is, how can they take control of the narrative to get their story out there? And part of it is going to be, I think, through social media and through some of the other things they're able to get their story out. But until they're able to control the narrative, publications like the New York Times are going to flip it. They're going to make it flip it for their own good, for the story that they want to tell, what they want the public to know, not necessarily what's really going on and what the students are there and what it's all about, Santita.
Well, I think that's why I appreciated the interviews this morning so much, because C-SPAN, I didn't mean that. C-SPAN really gives you the runway to take off and fly and tell the story, which is what you were doing this morning, because it was only when I started digging, because my godson, my cousin, is out at USC. So I've been checking on him. How are you doing? What's going on? How are things going? I had a niece who was doing some studying at UCLA. So you want to make sure they're okay. And they are also politically engaged. So my question is, how are you doing? What is it like? Are you able to move around the campus? Because what I'm seeing at Columbia is unsettling to me. And what I'm seeing is it seems that Columbia, what happened with them served as an accelerant. I'm wondering if this will serve as an accelerant, because so many of us saw what happened. And when I saw you today, you're the first person I saw in mainstream media, if you will, who said, no, let me emphasize to you, let's highlight what happened in Los Angeles at UCLA, because no one has done that. They have made a false equivalency between the demonstrators and the counter protesters, who are provocateurs. I grew up in the civil rights movement. I know what a provocateur is. The only time Dr. King had a march, the only one of his marches in 13 years of public ministry that went south, well, it was a Black student from Morehouse who was connected to the CIA. That's why he had to go back to Memphis, because this Black student who was paid by the CIA started the violence in the back of the march. That's what happened. So, I'm trying to find out, what are we looking at, Professor Johnston?
I lost you for a second there.
I'm trying to find out, what are we looking at when we see what happened at UCLA, because that is very disturbing.
Yeah, I think that it is essential to note that we are now seeing the arrival of a new generation of student activists, and that this is the first thing that they have done on a national level. I was thinking about this earlier today. Not only, these folks, undergrads today, this is the generation that spent the end of their high school and beginning of their college on lockdown, right? We saw a wave of organizing and activism during the COVID lockdowns, but this is, and a lot of folks did not get involved with that because they did not want to expose themselves to that risk. In that era. I think a lot of the folks who are protesting on campus right now were of an age when they wouldn't have likely to get involved. So on the one hand, this is their first moment since COVID of coming out. It also occurred to me today that if you are 18 years old now, the last presidential election that Donald Trump was not involved in came when you were 6 years old. The Obama's re-election campaign, which is, I would argue, the last time that either party put up somebody who young people felt moved by, came when you were 6 years old. And then when you were 10, Donald Trump ran and won while losing the popular vote. And then when you were 14, you saw Donald Trump run again after having been president your entire tween years. And now you have a president who has a very, very hard time connecting with young people in any way, even when his policies are policies that in some cases are ones that are clearly designed to appeal to young people. So I think what we are seeing right now, and now we have Biden and Trump both running again in the fall. I think what we are seeing right now is an opening up of a valve where young people have been in a position where they have been very constrained in what they could do, where the political system has not given them much cause for optimism. And they are coming out and they are standing up for themselves and standing up for others in a way that I don't think is going to be shut down very easily.
Why has there been this shift on thinking about Israel? It's been profound, and it seems like it happened like that.
I don't think it happened overnight. I think this is something that has been brewing for a long time.
Okay.
Because if you go back 20 years, there were lots of people on the left who were critical of Israel. But in general, what you saw before Netanyahu was that within both political parties, there was a consensus that Israel needed to be protected, that Israel was a fundamentally stable and necessary national project. And there was a sense that, and it deteriorated over time, but there was a sense that you just needed to find the right collection of moves to get to a two-state solution, right? When I was in college in the late 80s and early 90s, there was a belief that it was possible to get to a national homeland for the Jews and a national homeland for the Palestinians living side by side. That image was harder and harder to sustain as time went on, but it was there. What has happened in the last 20 years is that Benjamin Netanyahu has decided that he did not want to maintain his bipartisan coalition in the United States, that he did not want to continue to do what he needed to do to keep Democrats on board. And so now where we're at is the Republican Party is united in support of Israel, and the Democratic Party is deeply divided and divided over generational lines. And so what has happened in the last few months is that this war has revealed fault lines that have been growing for 20 years and made it impossible to paper over them anymore.
Can you compare this to the Vietnam protests? It doesn't seem like numerically we're there, but I don't know. It seems it's so intense.
We are not there numerically. We are not there in terms of the radicalism of student tactics, right? Students were burning down buildings in 1968, 69, 70. Students were street fighting with the cops in ways that students are not now. I think it's really important to remember that the student tactics right now, even in the building occupations, but the vast majority of campuses aren't even seeing those. The student tactics right now are extremely moderate, much more moderate than they were in the 60s. I think, though, that one of the ways in which this moment resembles the 60s for me increasingly is that in 1968, you had, in the spring of 1968, when Columbia had its last huge uprising, what you had was a position in national politics where both political parties were committed to a war that young people found unconscionable. Neither party was speaking for opposition to war and opposition to the atrocities that were happening in that war. And there was a sense that electoral politics was not going to provide a solution, and that traditional liberalism was not going to provide a solution. I think it's useful to remember as well that when Columbia explodes, it is in the wake of the assassination of Dr. King, right? And when the convention in Chicago explodes, it is in the wake of the assassination of Bobby Kennedy. And as far as the left movement had moved by 1968, young people, even radicals, even folks who were calling themselves revolutionaries, still found room for pain in their hearts for the assassinations of King and Robert Kennedy. This was the death of their belief in liberalism. And I think that we have an opportunity still today to not go down that path. We have an opportunity to turn the car around before we get to Kent State and Jackson State. But that decision is going to be one that is going to require a lot of courage, because there's a lot of pressure in the opposite direction right now.
Well, the provocateurs, who are called counter demonstrators, but they're provocateurs. It seems they are aggressive.
So yeah, I want to actually draw a distinction between two kinds of counter demonstrators.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Because I think one of the things that we're seeing on these campuses is students are creating these encampments, and they are closed encampments, right? They don't want other people to come in. And there are folks who are coming and saying, I want you to let me in, or I want to film, right? And then they're putting up their blankets, or they're putting their hands up against the cameras. I think that kind of back and forth is something which at times gets aggressive and is at times troubling. But that is a contestation over public space. And I'm a civil liberties guy. I'm a free speech guy. And I think that people arguing over how public space should be used, even if it gets rowdy, is something that I can support and find healthy. What we have seen at UCLA and what we have begun to see at a couple of other campuses is not people jostling, arguing with each other, even rowdily over public space. It is physical assault on protesters. And that is an escalation which honestly I associate with the depths of the Jim Crow era in the United States, where you have the freedom riders coming into town and there is a mob prepared to beat them and the cops stand aside, right? If that is where we go in the United States, I mean, you want to talk about getting the message on your side. The fear that I have is that the way that these young people get the message on their side is by being beaten and dying, because that is what has happened in the past.
It feels very aggressive, and just being of people who are veterans of the civil rights movement, that is what is unsettling to me. Let me bring in a civil libertarian, because I know we have about 10 minutes left, but I wanted to bring in Attorney Mark Fancher. Did you have a question for, or an observation that you've heard about? I mean, what you're taking away from what Professor Johnson is giving to us today?
Yeah, I find it difficult to fit any of what's going on now into the traditional U.S. political paradigm. I think it is completely unprecedented, and I think that there are some things that are very profound and deep that are happening that defy observation if you just look at it casually. When in the 1960s, during the anti-war movement, you had a number of things going on. You had, as Professor Johnston mentioned, a lot of people who were very radical, very militant, who were self-described radicals and communists and other things, along with people who were engaging in civil disobedience. You had resistance to a war that was happening overseas. And in that respect, there is some parallel with what's happening now. But there are some differences. One is that the resistance to the war very often, and people don't talk about this very much, was not always simply based on principle and morality. Many times people were resisting the war as a way of self-preservation. They did not want to go over and die in Southeast Asia. And there was not necessarily a feeling of solidarity with the people of Vietnam. There was just a resistance to the idea of causing a lot of US young people to go to their deaths. And that fired and fueled a lot of the resistance. You also had a situation where it was easy to demonize many of the people who were resisting the war, the radicals and the militants and others who were burning down buildings and all of that kind of thing. And then you also had, even though there was a lot of rhetoric about revolution, in the end, you still had a movement which, in many respects, still tied itself to the political process. They were still pinning their hopes on Bobby Kennedy and Eugene McCarthy and other people, Julian Bond, to work within the system to try and change things. If you fast forward to now, you have a mass movement of people who are not in any way concerned about self-preservation. It is totally about self-sacrifice out of love, genuine love and concern for fellow human beings who are being killed by the thousands, which is a very different kind of a thing from what we've had. You don't have people who are brandishing rifles, who are engaging in aggressive acts of violence. They're waging love. And you also have, as Daryl mentioned, a physical manifestation of solidarity by replicating, to the extent that they can, the conditions that people are living in Gaza, and demonstrating an empathy that they have not, that we've not seen. And then you add to that the very potent message, and the potent analysis about the contradictions of so-called U.S. democracy, the contradictions of Zionism, the warlike and aggressive conduct of the Israeli state, and a willingness and an ability of very young people to think very deeply about this and the implications of all of this for who they are. And in practical terms, the total irrelevance of the political process. Nobody is looking at this in terms of which candidate is going to respond best to this emergency. Is it going to be Trump or is it going to be Biden? Those guys are irrelevant. Nobody is pinning their hopes on on the White House to resolve this. In fact, they've written them off as solutions. They think of them as part of the problem. And so you have something that is more dangerous than anything that you've seen in this country in quite some time, in that you have a mass movement that's built on love, empathy for fellow human beings, concern for welfare, concern for being moral and doing the right thing, and an absolute commitment to doing it no matter what the cost. And that is very, very, very frightening to the powers that be, because they can't control that. There is nothing that they can do to put that down other than to try, as a last resort, to terrify a young generation and to dissuade them from getting involved in this. It is a last-ditch effort to try and preserve whatever little control that they have had over this group, of this demographic. And they are going to fail. They know they're going to fail. And so for that reason, they really don't care about their public image or how they show up in the public mind on this, because they got nothing else to do. They got nowhere else to go.
Well, Professor Johnston, these last 5 minutes, I want to give to you, because that kind of brings us back to where we were when we started. You know?
It does. And, as I was listening to you speak, and I think there's a lot of profound truth in what you just said, as I'm listening to you speak, I'm reminded, and I'm thinking that one of the things for me that this moment brings out is that it's a kaleidoscope of American history, that there are shards of different pieces that keep coming into focus. And as you were speaking and talking about a movement of young people who are motivated by love, a movement of young people who are selfless and willing to reach out and act on behalf of others, and a power structure that has no answer to them. I keep thinking about SNCC. I keep thinking about the beloved community. Keep thinking about that period in the early 60s where you have young people from across the country going south and young Southerners standing up at the risk of death and joining together in an attempt to create the beloved community and an attempt to remake America. I'm thinking about John Lewis's original draft of his speech in the March on Washington in 1963, before all the old heads got together and said, you got to tone it down a little bit, John. You got to just dial it back just a little bit.
Just a little.
Just a little bit. You got to stop saying that we're on the brink of revolution. You got to stop saying that we are on the verge of giving up. Because what we saw in that moment was young people who were committed to building a new world. And in the white power structure in the South, an old world that knew that it was dying, right? An old world that knew that the only way to maintain its power was through violence and the threat of violence. And so all of the guardrails disappeared, right? All of the things holding them back no longer applied, because they knew that this was a war that they could not win except through brutality. And
can I just, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think you're absolutely right. And I just want to point out one thing though, and that is that the enemies, if we want to use that word, which is a strong word, of SNCC are a little bit different from the enemies of this movement. And the enemies of this movement were, their interests coincided with SNCC's. They too wanted to break down segregation because they wanted access to black dollars. And now the more powerful interests are the focus of the students, and they're reacting exactly as the white power structure did in the South.
Yeah,
I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah. Every few years, the country decides that it cares about student protest again, and so my phone starts ringing, and I saddle up again. And one of the things that always happens in these circumstances is people will say, "What are your criticisms of the movement?" And I'm like, dude, if you want criticisms of the movement, go find somebody else. There's lots of people in your Rolodex who will give you criticisms of the movement. That is not my job. But one of the things that I think is my job is to look for hope, because I believe that youth movements have changed the world in ways that nobody expected, many, many times in the past. I agree with you that this is a very dark moment. But as somebody who was on campus in the 80s, one thing I'll say, and I guess I'll close with this, we've been talking a lot in this country about the anti-apartheid movement on the campus in the 80s. And there are two things which we continue to forget. One is that movement did not begin in the 80s. American students started demonstrating against apartheid in the 1950s. The divestment movement begins in 1976. This is a long haul movement, and we forget that sometimes. The other thing that we forget is that until about 10 minutes before Nelson Mandela walks out of that jail, we thought that apartheid was going to last for a very, very long time.
Absolutely.
There was not a lot of optimism. I know that we were talking about decades. We were talking about revolution. We were talking about thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people dying to gain liberation for South Africa. And then it changed. And so there are moments when the world changes quickly, and they are not always visible in advance. And I hope that we are in one of those moments right now.
Professor Angus Johnston, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I've got to have you back.
I will come back whenever you want me. This was lovely.
Gotta have you back. And I thank God for your courage, for your passion, for your objectivity, and for what you are trying to do to really, because I believe you're helping to lift us. When you talk about hope, I say, hey, keep hope alive. And I mean that. That's not trite. It's real.
No, it is real. It is real.
You can't do anything. You got to have hope. But pay attention to what happened in Los Angeles, everybody. Pay attention to provocateurs who are called counter demonstrators, because they are behaving like the bull counters. They are behaving like them. And I hope we don't have to have something awful happen. But, you know, God uses ordinary people to do extraordinary things. And sometimes it's the little things that change everything. Professor Angus Johnston, student activism. Thank you so much. Thank you for the work that you do. I'm going to reach back out to you and have you back. Attorney Rock Fancher, sending you so much love. Attorney Daryl Jones, I see you on the other side. God bless you. Let's continue this discussion with a student from UNC Chapel Hill. She's going to tell us what's happening there. Back in just a minute.